If it's Tuesday, a high-stakes court hearing is happening right now on the fate of the Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador, as questions loom over what consequences, if any, the Trump administration will face if it defies the courts. Plus, the Trump administration freezes more than $2 billion in research funding for Harvard University after the Ivy League institution rejected the president's demands to overhaul its admissions process and halt its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And tariff turmoil. Trump's trade war with China roils Main Street as U.S. port cities brace for a steep decline in business that could bring higher prices, fewer jobs, and a new era of economic uncertainty. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where we're following breaking news as a hearing gets underway in the case of a Maryland man the DOJ admitted was mistakenly sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador. The hearing comes amid an escalating standoff between the White House and the federal courts and growing questions about what happens if the president defies the judiciary in this case or in one of several other immigration-related cases. The hearing happening right now is for the judge in Maryland to get an update on what steps the government is taking to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the U.S. after last week the Supreme Court ordered the administration to, quote, facilitate his return. The Trump administration has so far not acted on that order and appears ready to defy it, as several administration officials claim that it's not up to them whether Mr. Abrego Garcia is returned.
Deporting him back to El Salvador was always going to be the end result. There is never going to be a world in which this is an individual who's going to live a peaceful life in Maryland.
That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us.
He's a citizen of El Salvador. So it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens.
He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today insisted that the administration is operating within the confines of the law and is complying with all court orders. Moments ago, Mr. Abrego Garcia's wife spoke outside the courthouse as she continues to fight for the return of her husband.
Today is 34 days after his disappearance, and I stand before you filled with spirit that refuses to bring down. I will not stop fighting until I see my husband alive. I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmar. Enough is enough. My family can't be robbed from another day without seeing Kilmar.
But it's not just the case of Mr. Abrego Garcia, where President Trump appears ready to push the powers of his authority as part of his deportation crackdown. While meeting with El Salvador's president yesterday, President Trump also floated the idea of deporting U.S. citizens, a move experts say is obviously illegal. Meanwhile, NBC News has exclusive reporting on the government's case against Mahmoud Khalil. He's the former Columbia University student activist and legal permanent resident who's now scheduled to be deported. NBC News reviewed more than 100 pages of documents submitted by the government, some of which appear to show government lawyers relying on unverified tabloid claims. And in the case of the Tufts University graduate student who was taken into ICE custody last month, arrested by plainclothes officers on a sidewalk, a district court judge questioned yesterday if the Trump administration might trigger a, quote, constitutional crisis by not releasing Rumeswe Ozturk if he determined that her arrest violated the law. Joining me now is our team of reporters to cover all of this. NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, and NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian. So, Julia, first to you. On this hearing, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, it's just getting underway. We did, though, just get a status update from the government moments ago. What can you tell us about that, and what can we expect to hear from the government in court today?
Yeah, this is fascinating. We just saw a filing from the government as they were preparing to walk into court to go before this judge who has ordered the government to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. And they said, sure, we will welcome him back into the United States as soon as he presents himself at a port of entry, after which we will take steps to deport him. So the idea that this man who's being held in a high security prison in El Salvador is going to, on his own volition, get out of there and walk to a port of entry at the U.S.-Mexico border is a little beyond fathomable at this point. I think this is their way of trying to show the government how far they're willing to go to define what it means to facilitate, which is exactly what the Supreme Court ordered them to do. This judge, of course, first ordered them to facilitate and effectuate his return. And now they are really going into court quite boldly today saying this is about as far as we're willing to go to get this man back.
And Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, they're also saying that they'll just deport him again. I mean, isn't part of the question here whether or not he was in a position to legally be deported? Doesn't that still need to be adjudicated?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they say that they would then just deport him again. I think the question here, though, is would they still deport him under the Alien Enemies Act, or would they actually have to give him due process? Remember, the Supreme Court has even said, although the president can invoke the Alien Enemies Act, they need to be able to give people due process and time to be able to argue that they're not, in fact, part of the class that they're seeking to remove from the United States. In other words, to argue that they're not part of MS-13 or the Tren de Aragua Venezuelan gang. And so the question is, if he came back to the United States, would he get that due process? In 2019, he was given the ability to stay here legally on a temporary basis. It was an order called withholding of removal. That's actually a higher bar than asylum even, because this judge said it was too dangerous for him to go back to El Salvador. The government can move to remove that protection, but they would have to do it through a legal process. That's what his lawyer has argued that they could do all along, and they sidestepped that process. So the question is, if he got back here and they did decide to deport him, would they give him that due process? But all of these are big hypothetical, Ryan, because I don't even know how he would get to the U.S. border in the first place.
Right. We'd have to get to that stage anyway. But let's go back now to that meeting yesterday in the Oval Office between President Trump, President Bukele. Does that loom over this hearing in Maryland today? Will the judge take any of that into account?
Yeah, it's absolutely looming for all of us who are wondering how the government's going to respond today. Previously, Drew Ensign, who's the same lawyer who's spoken in multiple cases before multiple federal judges to defend the administration's policy when it comes to this El Salvadoran prison, he will go again before the judge today. And previously, he hasn't given much information. He's really said that there's not a lot he can give. Well, it's hard for him to do that after Trump yesterday in the Oval Office gave a lot of information. The fact that he's directing Bukele to build more prisons, to expand his policy. But when it comes just to the case of Abrego Garcia, which is what is at hand today, Trump has said that, look, we can't go into El Salvador and get this man back. And Bukele said, we can't smuggle him into the United States. Both countries are pointing at the other, saying that it's in violation of the other's sovereignty should they make a move to remove this man and bring him back into the United States. So I think that Ensign will have a harder time to argue today that he simply is being kept in the dark when the American public has been given this information now that really these two sides are as close as they are, as much as they're talking, that they're really not doing anything to effectuate his return.
Yeah, they were literally in the same room together. They could have come up with a plan without too much trouble at all. Okay, Julia, thank you for that. Let's go now to the White House where Kelly O'Donnell is standing by, and we should point out that Julia is continuing to watch this hearing, and she'll update us if there are any new developments. Kelly, has the White House given any indication of whether or not it's going to abide by whatever today's ruling is in Maryland? And is the administration concerned about being held in contempt?
Well, certainly the administration publicly says that it is the president's intention to abide by court orders and to follow the law. But then there's plenty of room for interpretation because they insist they have done so thus far. And certainly there are part of the hearing today is to try to figure out what has happened. So there are open questions about that. But clearly what we know is the Trump administration is taking a very aggressive approach to this case. Even though in the court record it was acknowledged that this was an administrative error, there was a mistake in transporting this individual to El Salvador and then imprisoning him. He's got no criminal record in either country, and they've not been able to provide more information, but they just say publicly that they have determined that he is, today he was called a foreign terrorist by Caroline Leavitt, and an ongoing threat. So they say they are following the law. The question will be, do the courts agree with that? And is there a way for a process to take place to guarantee the overall overarching commitment to the rule of law that goes beyond this one person? In fact, the part of that aggressive stance is the White House is saying that people should be more concerned about victims of crime than this particular individual. So they want to very clearly say that this is a done deal, that he will not be back in the United States. At the same time, they're saying that they're following the rule of law. So it makes it very difficult, and they worked very hard to interpret the Supreme Court and its position about using the word facilitate and how they're trying to really determine the meaning of that word would dictate what they do. So this will be an ongoing fight. And its bigger impact is what it could mean for other cases and other individuals who are part of either deportations or student visas being revoked or other things like that.
Well, and it could go even further, right, Kelly? Because the president floated the idea yesterday of actually sending American citizens to El Salvador, not permanent legal residents, not green card holders, American citizens. How seriously is the White House about this idea, and are they ready for the legal fight that it'll spark?
Well, Caroline Leavitt, speaking on behalf of the president today, fully embraced the fact that this is something the president is interested in, and he wants to find out if there's a legal way to do it. So they're acknowledging that there are laws that affect U.S. citizens and that typically U.S. citizens cannot be deported. And there are all kinds of constitutional protections that go for U.S. citizens, whether natural born or naturalized. And yet they are keeping open this door, and the president has repeatedly said it in conversations publicly and in conversations that he had with the El Salvadoran president. Some of that was in the Oval Office, but captured and then later published by the El Salvadoran government through video, where the president's very clearly saying homegrown threats, homegrown criminals. He would like to find a way, if El Salvador could build more prisons, that they could be sent there. So lots of questions, lots of constitutional issues. But what the White House is not doing is backing off that assertion, even just framing it as a question now and clearly showing the president's intent that he wants to have a very muscular approach to fighting crime.
Okay, Kelly O'Donnell, thank you for that. Let's turn now to Ken Delaney, who's on set here with me. And Ken, you have reporting on Mahmoud Khalil. He is, of course, the Columbia University student activist. He's a legal permanent resident who right now is being detained. What do we know about the government's case against him, and what happens next?
Right. Important to mention, he's married to a U.S. citizen. They're expecting a child who will be a U.S. citizen. And he was removed from the country on the grounds that the Secretary of State deemed him problematic for U.S. foreign policy. And they've accused him of being anti-Semitic and being pro-Hamas. And as you mentioned at the top, our colleague Chloe Atkins reviewed more than 100 pages of documents and found that the case for that is quite shaky and relies on, in some cases, New York Post stories. So, but they don't have to make that case. It's done. A judge has ruled that he is deportable. Now, he's appealing that ruling, and he has until mid-April to file that paperwork, and he'll remain here while that is getting sorted out. But unless he wins the appeal, he will be deported.
And when it comes to these court orders, what mechanisms do the judges have to enforce them?
So that's an interesting question, and one we haven't had to grapple with very often in our history. Judges can hold litigants in contempt. They have, and the ultimate power is they can jail them under civil contempt procedures. But the people that enforce that normally are U.S. Marshals. Well, they work for the Attorney General. Right. So you can see where we're going here. Now, there's been some interesting scholarship that suggests that maybe courts could appoint separate people, not marshals, but say a local sheriff to enforce their orders. But, you know, that sets up a kind of a set of problems that we don't really want to grapple with here. But the fundamental fact is, even in this case you were just talking about, the Abrego Garcia case, people believe that Donald Trump is violating that order, that he has not even asked for the release of that man when the Supreme Court has said he should facilitate that release. This is a place we've not been in American history.
We aren't grappling with it yet, but we may have to in the very near future. Ken Delaney, and thank you for that. And joining me now to talk about all of this is Robert Tsai. He's a professor of constitutional law at Boston University School of Law. So much to dig into with you, Professor, but let's first start with the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration really doesn't appear to be taking steps to facilitate his return, despite what they've said in their court filings, and that's despite what the Supreme Court explicitly told them that they have to do. What happens now? What can this district judge in Maryland do to try and find a path to getting him home?
Great to join you. I think it's incredibly important now in the hearing that's going on and in any subsequent proceedings for the district court judge to make a very clear record of this defiance. I think she's off to a good start in requiring these daily status reports. And it's quite clear in those status reports that the government is absolutely refusing to take any steps to bring this individual home. And instead, we get this last-minute report today saying that if he somehow shows up at a port in the United States, we don't know how that would happen, they're going to take him and they're going to send him to a different country. So there's no question here, I think, that while the government is trying to minimally follow these kinds of requirements, they're not at all following the letter or the spirit of the Supreme Court's unanimous opinion. They're not doing anything to comply with what the court called the proper order to facilitate his return. They are playing games in this regard. So what should be done next? I think in developing that record, what will be very important is to identify who is involved, who is dealing with the government's lawyers and making these decisions, because those are going to be the people who are held in contempt first. And then secondly, that will allow the judge to work her way up the food chain to higher ranking officials and also to escalate the sanctions if the early ones don't work. So I think those will be the important next steps.
Yeah, so break that down for us. It wouldn't be that she would necessarily hold Donald Trump in contempt right out of the gate. It would be more these court officials, these lawyers that are specifically working on the case today. What sort of penalty could there be associated with in a contempt charge of one of these lawyers that's working on the case?
Well, a judge is supposed to start at a lower point of pain. So fines, she could increase the size of the fines. She could make the fines every day. And then she can, if there's more recalcitrants, expand the number of people who are being fined. Any kind of a criminal sanction or threat of jail is supposed to be a last resort. So this is why the record is so important.
So it would build to a point before someone would actually be put in jail as a result of contempt. But how long can this process play itself out for? I understand your point here that she's building a record, that you're starting here to demonstrate just how much the administration is defying the court. How long could this process play itself out?
Well, it could be a matter of weeks. It could be longer. I think that the judge has indicated that she doesn't want to be toyed with, and I think this is the right attitude. The Supreme Court acted fairly quickly on the government's previous appeal. And I think that, the Supreme Court's initial mistake was to treat the Trump administration here as if they're acting in good faith and to give them kind of the presumption of regularity. But by now, I think what we're seeing is that they really have no desire to comply with this order unless they're directly told by the Supreme Court itself that this man has to be returned and that existing legal protocols have to be followed. The ones that were already identified in the conversation earlier are all available to the government. They just simply don't want to do anything other than to proceed on the basis of, one person's word against him that has not yet been tested in a court of law.
So does the Supreme Court need to be more clear what they're looking for, not give them any wiggle room with their language in the rulings that they hand down?
I think 100%. I mean, in a way, what we've seen historically is they sort of are following what the Supreme Court in an earlier period did with the desegregation cases, and to sort of give defendants opportunities to sort of comply and give a lot of flexibility. But here, I think it's a mistake given what the Trump officials have indicated to everybody, including in their filings. So they have to be much more pointed and direct about what they want to have happen and how quickly that must happen. If there's any positive evidence, we really haven't had a president defy a direct opinion by the Supreme Court of the United States. In the Hamdan case, when the court rejected a unilateral decision to create tribunals, the president backed down and turned to Congress to create those. So hopefully we'll get something similar here.
Okay, I guess the optimum word here is hope. Professor Tsai, we have a long way to go in this case. Thank you for breaking it down for us, sir. We appreciate it. Coming up, new threats from the White House in an escalating fight with Harvard University after the administration said it would freeze billions of dollars in grants because the university won't comply with the government's demands on DEI and more. Plus, how the administration's tariff war with China is roiling some of America's busiest ports. A live report from a Los Angeles community already feeling the economic toll. That's straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President Trump is escalating his standoff with Harvard, threatening on social media today to revoke the college's tax-exempt status. That comes a day after the White House announced that it was freezing more than $2 billion in grants to Harvard after the school refused to accept the Trump administration's demands, which included reforming its admissions process. Attorneys representing Harvard said in a statement that, quote, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. Rahima Ellis has covered education extensively for NBC News. She joins me now from Harvard's campus. Rahima, what is the White House demanding from Harvard?
The most recent demand, according to Harvard and how it has responded, seemed to go too far in terms of what the administration was demanding. I want to show you a full screen of what some of those demands are, and that is they want Harvard to reduce the power of students and faculty in university affairs, implement merit-based admissions and hiring practices. And some have said Harvard already has some of the highest standards in order to work and to go to school here. They want an elimination of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they want the school to report foreign students who are hostile to American values and institutions. When that was seen by the president of Harvard University, it seemed that that went too far. And as you point out in the statement that read just before you came to me, Ryan, they said that this would redefine the whole principle of what Harvard University was founded on and what it stands for today. Being the oldest university in the country, it said it wasn't ready to change its principles. Ryan?
So we're talking about $2 billion in grants right now that the federal government could withhold. How do they use this money?
Well, part of the money is used for operations here, but also it's for funding and grants and for research. This university is renowned for inspiring critical thinking and critical thinking, as well as some advancements in technology and medicine. It's renowned for that. But that comes with the help of money from the federal government and grants that students are using that they can do research on, and further opportunities that benefit not just people in the United States, actually, but all around the world. So research money really is very important, not just to Harvard University, but to universities all across the country, Ryan.
And what has the reaction been on campus? How are students and members of the faculty responding to this?
On campus, it's almost like a lifting of a cloud, the fact that the Harvard University's president has pushed back on the Trump demands. There are those who have written in the Harvard Crimson University newspaper that they think that this is exactly what the university needs to be doing. We heard from students who said that the morale here has been lifted as a result of how the university president had responded, because they thought that it was too much to ask, and because Harvard University earlier last month did give in to some of Trump administration demands, and much of saying that they would change the policies of how protests would occur on campus. They also adopted a definition of anti-Semitism that favored what the Trump administration wanted. So they are pleased, for the most part, with what has happened here in terms of the Harvard University president responding and pushing back on the Trump administration demands. Ryan?
A little bit different than how some of these other institutions have handled the situation. Rahima, thank you for being there. We appreciate that reporting. Turning now to the Trump administration's trade war, and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today telling reporters that the president is open to a deal with China, but insisting it's China that needs the deal, not the U.S. The Trump administration has imposed 145% tariffs on China although it announced several exemptions to those measures over the weekend. Concerns over those tariffs are particularly high at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, where workers worry the measures will lead to higher prices for consumers and less business for longshoremen whose livelihoods depend on Chinese imports. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joins me now from San Pedro, California. Steve, the UAW supports the tariffs on imported vehicles, but what about the union that represents the longshoremen?
Yeah, Ryan, I just got off the phone with the union head for this particular region, and I'm not going to give you an exact quote, but essentially he says that this union is dominated by workers who like to keep their heads down, that they don't necessarily take a political stance in this fashion. However, anything that interferes with business coming into this port, you can imagine is frowned upon. That's because, as you said, that business directly translates into the livelihood of the workers, the people, especially the longshoremen, who do the actual work of getting that cargo off the docks. If less cargo comes in, they have less work. Less work means less on the paycheck, and that may mean less jobs. About half of the cargo that comes in here, this is an estimate, into Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, is business that is either imported or exported from China. So this is a direct impact on their lives. And a lot of them, I think, are so-called seasick. They're sort of worried and always watching as these updates to what's going to happen with the tariff situation changes almost hour by hour, day by day. It's a very turbulent situation. A lot of people are afraid right now, Ryan.
And, of course, you're hearing from the longshoremen themselves, but also these tariffs are having an impact on the small businesses that operate in and around the port. What did you learn there?
As I mentioned, everybody is worried. The longshoremen are about 15,000 strong. They represent about 55% of them live within a 5-mile circumference. It's 75% if you go to 10 miles. So you can imagine, I went to a pizza shop. 70% of their business is longshoremen. Went to a coffee shop where not only are the beans they're importing more expensive, so they're charging more for a cup of coffee, but less of the longshoremen, 80% of that business, are coming in to buy it. We spoke to the coffee shop owner of a place called Sirens, which is like the Cheers of San Pedro. Here's what she told me about the current situation. Listen to this.
Our coffee just went up $1 a pound. That's a lot. When we go through 600 pounds of coffee, that's a lot.
It's huge.
Yeah, and you're talking, a week or 2 weeks. So it does impact us on our bottom line. And then we have to figure out, how do we work that with our customer base? Do we add $5 for a cup of coffee? I don't want to do that, because the majority of people that come in here just want a decent cup of coffee, and we don't want to gouge them. They're getting gouged everywhere else. This is a safe zone.
She doesn't want to raise prices. She says this is a safe zone. That's every business we spoke to. They don't want to raise prices. They don't want to lay off people. But again, they are beholden. It is entirely dependent on what happens with these markets. Back to you.
Okay, Steve Patterson, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Up next, former President Biden returns to the spotlight. He's set to give his first major speech since leaving office in the next hour, as the Democratic Party tries to chart a new path forward without him. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Just a few minutes from now, former President Joe Biden is set to deliver his first major speech since leaving the White House. He'll be taking the stage in Chicago at a conference supporting Social Security. At the same time, his former running mate may also be planning some post-presidency moves of her own. Former Vice President Kamala Harris is reportedly considering a 2026 run for California governor. Politico reports Harris will make a decision on a candidacy by the end of the summer. Harris wouldn't be the first vice president to try to return to state-level politics after leaving Washington, and it's not always a success story. NBC News' Steve Kornacki is at the big board now with a look at what could lie in store for Vice President Harris. Steve?
Yeah, look, she's won office in California before. There's not a ton of polling on this for 2026 yet, but certainly there's warm feelings towards Harris among Democratic voters in California. But there could be some hiccups if she does decide to go forward with this. First of all, take a look here. You're seeing some potential candidates, some announced candidates who, if Harris were to jump in this race, she'd be facing. You have Javier Becerra, the former Biden cabinet official. He's in. Katie Porter, former congresswoman. She'd run for the Senate. She's in. Antonio Villaraigosa, a former mayor of Los Angeles. So there's potential threats, certainly, for Harris politically when it comes just to the loyalties of Democratic voters, not just liking her, but choosing her over some other potential big-name Democrats and other Democrats who might break through as the campaign unfolds. So that would be a hurdle for her. Obviously, the second is the system in California, the top two system. Everybody, Democrat, Republican, any party, runs on the same primary ballot. The top two advance to the fall, meaning if Harris were to run, she could potentially face a Democrat in the general election. You look at somebody like Rick Caruso. He's a businessman. He used to be a Republican. He ran for mayor of L.A. a couple years ago, emphasized public safety, emphasized quality of life. That kind of candidate, potentially, with potential bipartisan appeal, if he got to a general election, that could be a unique to California threat to somebody like Kamala Harris. But look, we don't know if she's going to run. If she does, this would be the track record here of former VPs who lost the presidency, then tried to make comebacks at the state level. Here's three. It was Richard Nixon, lost the presidency in '60 to JFK. He ran for California governor 2 years later in '62. Started out the big favorite over the Democrat Pat Brown. He lost. Hubert Humphrey, LBJ's VP, lost the '68 election to Richard Nixon. 2 years later, Minnesota Senate race, he won that seat. Humphrey was very popular in Minnesota. He won it easily. Here's Walter Mondale, 2002. He was well into his 70s. There was that tragedy. There were Paul Wellstone, the Democratic senator, died. He replaced Wellstone for the final week of that campaign and lost. But when you see Nixon and Humphrey, remember, they were both interested in these races because they wanted to run for president again. That was well known at the time. They both did end up running for president again. Is that ultimately, whatever she decides here, where Harris wants to go? If it is, she's certainly thinking of this. These are the three modern vice presidents here who've made it on their own to the presidency eventually. Again, took Nixon a while after being vice president, took Biden a while. Remember, he didn't run in 2016, waited until 2020. And then there was George Bush Sr., who was elected to replace Reagan at the end of Reagan's second term.
All right, Steve Kornacki at the big board. Thanks for breaking that down for us. Speaking of well-known figures in California politics, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been representing her San Francisco district since the Reagan administration. But now she's getting a primary challenge from someone with experience being the underdog and winning some long-shot races. NBC's David Noriega has the story.
With 19 months to go until the midterms, it's a little early to be running for Congress.
My name's Shoykat, by the way. What's your name?
But Shoykat Chakrabarti knows he has an uphill battle. The message is clear enough.
For most Americans, wages have been stagnating for decades.
Chakrabarti is a populist in the style of Bernie Sanders. The challenge is getting people to know his name, because pretty much everyone knows his opponent's name, Nancy Pelosi.
The House will be in order.
After close to 4 decades and a legendary career in Congress, Pelosi is widely seen in her San Francisco district as a trailblazer and a hero. But she's also turning 86 next year, and she's an emblem of a party facing growing unrest over what many Democrats see as a tepid response to Donald Trump. Pelosi hasn't announced yet whether she's retiring before the midterms, but she did file paperwork required to run again.
People here in San Francisco are very loyal to Nancy Pelosi. She's been an institution here for decades. At the same time, a lot of people think it's time for a change.
I believe that she's really out of touch. I think with the amount of time that she's been in office, the kind of benefits that she's had, you got to give it up to younger people.
I think she's very wealthy, and I think she's very old, and I think her time is done.
Chakrabarti hopes that's where he comes in.
Is there some symbolism to dethroning this massive, powerful figure in the Democratic Party for you?
I think there would be, not just for me, but I think for a lot of people. I've got a lot of respect for Nancy Pelosi's career, but I do think she's operating in a different era of politics.
What do you say Democrats should be doing differently now?
I mean, honestly, they just got to be fighting way harder than they do.
Pelosi's office didn't respond to our request for comment, but those close to Pelosi say that she fights Trump harder than anyone, and the challenges to her barely register.
It's an endeavor I think most people regret because they get beat pretty bad.
Do you think Pelosi is worried about Chakrabarti's campaign?
I don't think the speaker is aware of his campaign.
But Chakrabarti has some experience with scrappy, long-shot campaigns. A former tech entrepreneur and founding engineer at the multi-billion-dollar payment processing company Stripe, Chakrabarti left Silicon Valley to work for Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign in 2016.
I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family.
In 2018, he ran the campaign for then unknown Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Hey everyone, my name is Troycott Chakrabarty.
His strategy involves bypassing big endorsements and going straight to voters.
Both parties have been ignoring kind of the biggest problems facing most people.
What did you learn from helping to get AOC elected?
The main thing I learned is that when there are these moments of change, everything that seems like it was impossible suddenly becomes possible.
Chakrabarty's platform is wildly ambitious.
The reality is there's $100 trillion global green transition happening, with or without us.
It involves remaking the entire American economy for workers and the environment.
We've done this plenty of times. We did it in World War II. We did it with the space race. It's a playbook we invented, in fact.
There's a sense that there's been a pretty widespread, in the general public, repudiation of the left, wokeism. How do you navigate that?
I just don't believe that voters are actually in this left versus right dichotomy. I think political elites are, but I think voters are about change versus status quo, action versus inaction.
We'll have to see. Thanks to David Noriega for that report. Up next, breaking news in the ongoing hearing about whether the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to the notorious prison in El Salvador will be coming home. But first, on this day in 1947, Jackie Robinson made his debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers, breaking the color barrier and becoming the first African-American to play Major League Baseball. Here he is on Meet the Press 10 years after that historic day, talking about the growing civil rights movement and responding to criticism that the NAACP was moving too fast. Take a listen.
I think that if we go back and check our record, the Negro has proven beyond a doubt that we have been more than patient in seeking our rights as American citizens. Be patient, I was told as a kid. I keep hearing that today. Let's be patient. Let's take our time. Things will come. It seems to me that the Civil War has been over about 93 years. If that isn't patience, I don't know what is.
Welcome back, and we are now going to check in on that breaking news. We've been covering the court hearing in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Moments ago, that hearing just wrapped up, and the judge appears to be once again expressing her frustration with DOJ lawyers as she's continuing to press the government for answers of what steps have been taken to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. Back with me now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. She's been following the developments in court today. So, Julia, what are your main takeaways from the hearing? Did the judge in any way appear satisfied with the government's answers regarding Mr. Abrego Garcia?
Short answer, no, Ryan. I've been getting the minute-by-minute update from our incredible producer, Gary Grumbach, who's been in court today in Maryland. And what this came down to, of course, is the dispute over the word facilitate again, where Drew Ensign, arguing for the Justice Department, is saying, look, you can see the signs. Look at what we've done to facilitate. You heard the discussion in the Oval Office yesterday where President Bukele of El Salvador was saying that he wasn't keen on trying to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. And you saw our most recent statement that they filed a declaration right before they went into court saying that if this man, Mr. Abrego Garcia, showed up at a U.S. port of entry, they would welcome him in. And Ensign made the argument that that in itself was facilitation. And Judge Zenas was not having that. She said that is not her definition of facilitation, and that if he were going to use that Oval Office exchange as evidence that he's following her order, she doesn't think that that would stand up in a court of law, especially what she called Bukele's quip about smuggling in Abrego Garcia. So she basically said, you can't take this kind of comedic back and forth between these two leaders in the Oval Office as evidence that there have been high-level conversations to bring him back. That doesn't suffice. So what she just ordered is an expedited discovery where they're going to get to the bottom of this word facilitate. Ensign saying that there have been other cases where facilitate has been used in a different way. Zenas is saying facilitate is used specifically to each case, and she says it's very clear what the Supreme Court meant when they ordered the government to facilitate the Abrego Garcia to be removed from El Salvador and brought back to the United States. And so she says that the court will be the referee of overseeing whether or not they are indeed doing that facilitation. And so she says in a matter of weeks, this should be determined because, Ryan, what all this is walking up to is a possible contempt order. She said she's not willing to talk about her thoughts on that now and whether or not she's willing to go that route. But if she doesn't get to the bottom of what the government is doing to bring this man back and to follow the order of facilitating his return, she cannot go forward and just check the box and say that they've done all that they could.
Okay, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for keeping on top of that. If anything else breaks before we end this broadcast, please come back and tell us. We appreciate it. Still to come, we're going to show you some live pictures of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez holding a rally with Senator Bernie Sanders in a historically Republican stronghold of California. We're going to dig into the politics of all of it. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Stay on top of breaking news and the biggest stories of the day with NBC News Daily. Get in-depth reporting from across the country and around the world and ways you can take care of your health and your wallet. NBC News Daily, weekdays from 12 to 4 on NBC News Now.
News lives in the now.
Look at this. You can't even see anything anymore.
Let's break down what we know.
You gotta see this.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
Listen to full episodes of Meet the Press wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. And you are about to be looking live at Bakersfield, California, where Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are continuing their Fighting Oligarchy tour in front of thousands. This latest swing has seen Sanders and AOC draw big crowds in both red areas and blue areas, including Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, and then last night in Nampa, Idaho. Joining me now to talk more about this on set is Francesca Chambers. She's the White House correspondent for USA Today. Eugene Robinson, longtime columnist and an NBC News contributor, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. So, Francesca, Bakersfield, California. There was a pretty popular politician there by the name of Kevin McCarthy who represented that area for quite some time. This is not a liberal area by any means. Should we read into the fact that AOC and Bernie Sanders can draw such a big crowd in a place like this?
Well, Bernie Sanders has never had a problem drawing big crowds as someone who covered both of his presidential campaigns. But Democrats have been struggling to find a party leader post-Biden presidency and Kamala Harris's candidacy. And we've seen in polling that to the extent that they think that there is one, AOC is topping that list right now. But that's only 10% of Democrats. And then after that, you know, you see Kamala Harris as well as Bernie Sanders, and then other elected party leaders in Washington. But what I'm hearing from Democrats, Ryan, is that the base feels like their elected leaders in Washington are just out of touch, that they don't feel like they're representing them well against Donald Trump. But at the same time, Democratic Party insiders feel like in the last election, they got beat and that they need to be doing something different, and they're soul searching for a new message and a way to expand the party's base.
Yeah, it's interesting you say different. different, Eugene, because Bernie pretty consistently says the same thing all the time.
Bernie is Bernie and has been Bernie for a long time.
Exactly. And I just want to play one thing that he said in his LA speech yesterday that stood out to me. So take a listen to that.
I invite the president to come to LA. Tell the people here why you think it's a great idea to cut Medicaid and nutrition and health care so you can give tax breaks to billionaires.
So these are the things he's been saying for a long time, but is this the moment for that message?
You know, look, who's drawing crowds? Who's creating excitement? Who are we talking about? We're talking about Bernie and AOC. So they're doing something that the insiders in Washington are not doing. And I kind of thought after the election that I assumed there would be a renaissance and renewal of the Democratic Party, because parties do renew themselves after a defeat. And I thought it would happen out in the country. So I would be paying attention to this traveling show that is drawing huge crowds everywhere it goes. Idaho. You know, that's not a red state. That's not Brooklyn.
Yeah. Well, Matt, from your perspective, as somebody that's helped make ads for Republican candidates, is AOC a good foil for Republicans in this environment?
Absolutely, she has, and she has been for a while. She's taken that mantle from Nancy Pelosi, where we lost kind of that effectiveness about, a little while ago. But so much of this conversation, especially what Francesca was saying, reminds me of where we were as a party. You could have transposed it in 2013 and 2014. People forget how close we came to not having Mitt Romney, right? Or we almost had a Rick Santorum or a Newt Gingrich in the 2012 primaries, and then the establishment kind of held him back. And then by 2016, they blew the doors off, and you had Trump, and he actually won. I feel like we're in that point where the establishment really was able to obviously have Harris come in. It was a unique set of circumstances. But 2028, somebody like an AOC, that they're not going to be held back anymore by the establishment.
But to your point, may that not be a bad thing for Democrats?
Well, it worked out for us.
You wouldn't have wanted Donald Trump as a candidate.
History doesn't guarantee anything. It worked for us. It was very unique. Obviously, we didn't expect it, most of us, in 2016. But, who knows what could happen in 2028.
Yeah. But let's look at an election that's even closer in 2026. The Democrats I'm talking to in Washington, D.C. say that they're not concerned yet that there's no clear consensus around a party leader, because you'll start to see these Democrats who are thinking about running in 2028 start hitting the trail in the midterms for the candidates who are on the ballot. And you'll start to get a sense more of what their message is, and someone will maybe start to emerge then as potential leader.
But the one caveat to that is that AOC is out there now.
Yeah.
Right? And that makes a difference.
She's actually interesting. I got to tell you, when you have Gretchen Whitmer putting filed folders in front of her face, and Andy Bashir making everybody fall asleep on his podcast. She's interesting. And that's a trait she shares, probably grudgingly, she'd admit, with Trump. She's charismatic.
Right. So to Francesca's point, though, maybe there's not a clear leader yet, but we do see Democrats maybe starting to hone in a bit on a message. We saw 2 Democratic ads come out today for people that are running. Mikey Sherrill running for New Jersey governor this year. And then, of course, the DSCC running against Tom Tillis. Listen to both of these ads and what they have in common.
I'm running for governor to defend the state we love, to drive down costs for housing, healthcare, and utilities, to protect everything from your Social Security to our fundamental freedoms, to stand up to Trump and Musk with all I've got.
So we're seeing Elon Musk be used quite a bit by these Democratic candidates. We also hear Social Security. Is this effective a message? If you're a Republican, are you nervous about this message coming at your candidates?
Well, I would say it's a little bit of apples and oranges. The DSCC has its own thing, but, Sherrill is a very competitive primary against Josh Gottheimer, who's a more moderate Democrat, very well funded. So I think what I took note of more than anything else was kind of the rock music and, more importantly, that army jacket. I think she's trying to make a contrast between the consultant out of New York City and Josh Gottheimer. So that's what I took out of it first. But look, we'll see where these things come. Obviously, Musk worked for them a little bit in Wisconsin, but it doesn't always work.
Elon Musk comes off as a Bond villain. He is the perfect. I mean, if Republicans leave him out there, if he's out there as one of the faces of the party, then Democrats are going to have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, but does he serve as a heat shield for Donald Trump, though, to a certain extent, Francesca?
He doesn't have a high favorability rating, and there's a way that you're seeing them thread the needle here to say, even if you're an independent who voted voted for Donald Trump in the last election, but perhaps you don't like Elon Musk as independents do not in that polling, then, here's my message for you. Americans are saying in these polls that they think that the things that, even if they thought that they wanted Trump to take on these things or Musk, they don't like the way with which they're approaching them, and they're skeptical that they're doing it with, I guess, all the efficiency that they would prefer.
Yeah. Okay, so let's change gears now. I want to talk about Steve Bannon, always a great topic at this table. But he was taking questions alongside Congresswoman Nancy Mace last night. He made some comments about an unconstitutional third Trump term. Take a listen to what he said.
I haven't said we're going to amend the Constitution. We're working on 5 or 6 different alternatives that President Trump could run again and be president. And quite frankly, I think 4 or 5 of them are going to work. And I continue to say, as I told Bill Maher, on the afternoon of January 20th of 2029, Donald Trump's going to be president for his 3rd term.
This keeps popping up. I know people are annoyed that we talk about it, but Matt, there's one person that could end all this speculation today, and he refuses to do that, and that's Donald Trump. Why doesn't he just end it? Say, I can't do this, and there's no point in talking about it.
Donald Trump not relishing the drama or something? I think that must not be Donald Trump. No, look, people talk about it because they know it's going to get them in stories and get them in TV packages. That's the bottom line of why people talk about it, and they know it's bait for a lot of this right now. I think that's really the only reason why it keeps coming up in a lot of these respects. They know it gets them in the press.
But haven't we played this out before? I mean, what? Donald Trump joking about things, and then all of a sudden they become real. I mean,
how it becomes real is actually that the devil's in the details. There's really no way, absent again amending the Constitution, it becomes
But that
real.
doesn't mean that there couldn't be chaos as a result of it, right? There was no way for him to overturn the results of the 2020 election, but that led to a riot at the Capitol. I mean, how dangerous could this talk potentially be?
It depends on how far he would actually want to take it. And in the end, it seems to me it leads nowhere. So if he wants chaos, if he wants a vehicle for more chaos, he can, I guess, pretend, try, who knows? But it's not going to work. I mean, that's like one of the clearest parts of the Constitution.
Yeah. So we have less than 30. You're in the White House. Is this something they're taking seriously, or is it a sideshow?
I mean, after Kristen Welker asked him about this, they kind of tried to downplay it, the White House and President Trump did. Like, other people are saying that I should do this. They have ideas for how they do it. But as you mentioned, the details, no one has spelled those out, what those would be.
Even Bannon.
And does it affect them that Bannon keeps talking about it? Would they like it to go away?
I mean, honestly, I've not asked them that question in the last couple days, because they have clearly in the past said, this is something that he's not. Yeah. They have said in the past that he's not talking about. This is something that they are not thinking about.
Okay. I'll just keep talking about it, I guess. Francesca, Eugene, Matt, thank you all for being here. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.